Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Napoleon in Italy Part 2, Castiglione by Epic History TV. So, in the last episode of this series, we saw some of Napoleon's first victories in his Italian campaign. In fact, we saw him defeat the Kingdom of Piedmont, which was already an impressive victory, and push the Austrians back. In this video, we will see continued fighting against the Austrians. Now, before we jump into this reaction, I would appreciate it if you guys would check out the Patreon, which is linked down below, and the Discord. That's right, I just started a new Discord server for the channel, which I will link at the top of the description. In this Discord, you can talk about the channel's videos, history in general, whatever you want. So I'd appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon and the new Discord server. Anyway, with that stuff out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
An Epic History TV BMF Productions collaboration.
All right.
In 1796, at the height of the French Revolutionary Wars, a young French general took charge of a ragged, demoralized army in northern Italy.
Yes, so we're talking 1796. The French Revolutionary Wars have sort of gone back and forth. At times, France has been on the offensive. At times, they've been on the defensive. I would say overall, we're in a bit of a stalemate situation. Now, Napoleon takes over the Army of Italy, an army that really has been undersupplied, it hasn't gotten the attention it deserves, and he's going to turn this entire conflict around.
It was his first command. Many expected him to fail.
Yeah, well, up until this point, of course, Napoleon performed well at the Siege of Toulon, and he defended the government from a royalist uprising, right? But he was seen as a political appointee. He didn't have that much military experience. And so a lot of the officers, when he was appointed to the position, thought, well, he's only being appointed because of his political connections, which was true. That's exactly why Napoleon was given that position. And rightfully so, a lot of the officers thought, this guy probably doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have enough military experience. He's a joke. Napoleon arrived and very quickly showed them that he was the real deal.
Instead, in just 1 month, he won his first brilliant campaign. With astonishing self-confidence, boldness and energy, he led his army to victory after victory.
Yup.
Transforming the war in Europe, winning praise from a grateful republic, and forging a legend.
This is really where it all begins.
This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte's first campaign, and the dawn of a new age.
Yup. All right, Part 2, Castiglione.
May 1796. The French Revolutionary Wars have entered their 5th year. And on what most consider to be a secondary front, there has been a stunning development.
Yeah, well, as you could probably see on that map, most of the action is taking place up north, up the Rhine River. You know, the Army of Italy, it's not supposed to be that important. But then you send Napoleon there, and like I said, he turns everything around.
A 26-year-old general of the French Republic, Napoleon Bonaparte, has waged a lightning campaign across northern Italy, defeating the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia, and driving the Austrians across Lombardy.
Yep.
2,000 Austrian troops remain holed up in Milan's citadel, but they cannot prevent his triumphal entry into the city on the 15th of May.
And just that quickly, Napoleon has taken control of Milan, one of the most important, most powerful cities of northern Italy. In the region, it's a real center of culture, it's a center of trade, commerce, it's an intellectual center. It's a really important city, and just like that, Napoleon has occupied it.
Now, the French general holds court at the Palazzo Serbelloni, issuing decrees on behalf of the Directory in Paris, while his troops enjoy several days' rest. Lombardy is to be reorganized as a French client state.
And by the way, when we talk about, say, Austrian Italy or Austrian control of northern Italy, you can see on this map that there is some territory that Austria directly holds. But there's other territory, like Lombardy, we're just talking about Milan, or the Venetian Republic, that Austria might not officially hold, but they have a lot of control over. These have traditionally been Austrian client states. So when we talk about Austrian Italy, we're talking about the territory that Austria officially administers, but also sort of the broader Austrian-influenced region, right?
Known as the Lombardic Republic. Political and economic reforms sweep away the old Austrian state.
Yep, and we're already seeing some staples of Napoleon's political activity. Invade somewhere, occupy, establish a sister republic to France. We could also call it a French client state, depends how generous you want to be, and then institute a bunch of economic and political reforms.
To the delight of Italian intellectuals in cities like Milan. But the French also demand 20 million francs to help pay for the war, while their troops requisition vast quantities of food, horses, cattle, and boots.
The French occupation was very controversial. Now, on one hand, this is a foreign occupation, a hostile foreign occupation. But beforehand, you were under the boot of the Austrians. So for a lot of people, they don't like either. There's also the question of political affiliation. Now, keep in mind, the French Revolution was extremely controversial within France. The French Revolution and its ideas are controversial wherever the French go. But what that means is there are people who absolutely do not support these new reforms, those who collaborated with the Austrians, people who are pious, religious figures, priests, and there are people, a lot of the urban inhabitants of a city like Milan, a lot of the upper middle class intellectuals who absolutely do support the policies and reforms that Napoleon is bringing with him. So even within this new sister republic, this new French client state, these reforms are very controversial. But of course, Napoleon isn't just bringing modernizing reforms, he is also asking, and by asking, I mean demanding, a lot of money. And if it isn't given to him, he is perfectly fine with taking it.
Most inflammatory are their attacks on the property and dignity of the Catholic Church, which enrage Italian priests and peasants.
And this would honestly probably be the most controversial aspect of the French Revolution across Europe. Now, a lot of the monarchs of Europe don't like the liberal uprisings, but if we're talking about the vast majority of Europeans, mostly peasants at this point, the thing that they hate the most about the French Revolution is how anti-Catholicism it is. We see the same thing in Spain and Portugal. A lot of the Spanish, Portuguese peasants hate the French Revolution because they know it is very hostile to Catholicism. And we're seeing the same thing here. Probably what the people of this region dislike most about the French Revolution is how irreligious it is. Now, of course, that is, once again, not universal. A lot of those middle and upper class intellectuals will also be rather anti-clerical as well, but for a lot of the peasants, they are not on board with this.
And are a gift to anti-French propagandists.
Yeah.
On the 23rd of May, as Napoleon's troops set off in pursuit of the Austrians, revolt breaks out in Pavia. The next day, there are riots in Milan. Napoleon races back to the city, where order is soon restored. But on the road to Pavia, at Binasco, he encounters 1,000 armed rebels.
Yep.
Colonel Lannes' grenadiers rout the peasants, killing 100 and burning the village. A terrible example, which will be effective, Napoleon writes.
I was wondering if they're going to show some of these quotes from Napoleon. Napoleon burns down this town very much on purpose. It's not like it gets out of hand. He knows what he's doing. Napoleon intends to set an example. Now, he doesn't want to go around burning down every town he sees. That would be ineffective. And to be fair, he had some level of morality. But what Napoleon wants to do is set an example. Show everybody, look, we're bringing these reforms to our new sister republic. These people of the revolution. But don't get the wrong idea. You cannot rise up and revolt against us. We are here to rule. And as long as you're in accordance with us, you'll get off splendidly. But if you want to oppose us, this is what's going to happen.
Pavia is retaken the next day, with little opposition.
Exactly.
A score of ringleaders, including several priests, are shot. Hundreds of hostages are taken from prominent local families to ensure future cooperation.
Clearly, they saw the example Napoleon had just set, and obviously, these are some heavy-handed tactics, but this is relatively merciful compared to burning the entire town down, right?
Napoleon resumes his advance east. His army now organized into 4 divisions: Kilmain's advance guard, Augereau, Massena, and Serrurier.
And keep an eye on Mantua in the bottom right corner. This is a real stronghold of Austrian influence. It's going to be important throughout this early campaign.
General Berlioz's Austrian army holds the line of the Mincio River, with Lake Garda on his right and the great fortress of Mantua on his left.
Right.
This, together with the fortresses at Peschiera, Verona, and Lagnago, forms the famous quadrilateral. 4 bastions that cement Austria's grip on northern Italy. But once more, Beaulieu can't get a read on Napoleon's movements.
And Napoleon has taken Milan, which is, like I mentioned, a very important city in the region. But this region right here, where Beaulieu is stationed, this is really the heartland of Austrian influence in Italy. This is what they really do not want to lose to the French.
He scatters his troops, trying to defend 4 potential crossing points, and is further distracted by fake preparations to cross Lake Garda by boat.
Oh, way too spread
In
out.
fact, Napoleon has decided to cross the Mincio at Borghetto. And when Kilmain's advance guard arrives, they find the bridge defended by a single battalion of infantry and handful of hussars. The Austrians are soon driven back, but a sudden counterattack nearly bags General Bonaparte himself. A possibly dramatized account has him hopping over fences with one boot on to evade the hussars.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories from this period of Napoleon's career. Well, there's a lot of stories throughout the entirety of Napoleon's career that are very likely dramatized and exaggerated. Now, there's a lot of debate over this amongst historians. Is this true? Is that true? A lot of times we don't entirely know. I think it's worth assuming that there is truth to a lot of these stories we hear, but to take everything with a grain of salt. Not every heroic charge that Napoleon supposedly led from the front actually happened, but some of them did.
This lucky escape leads to the formation of an elite cavalry detachment to act as Napoleon's personal escort. They are named the Compagnie des Guides à Cheval. Their commander is a young cavalry captain named Jean-Baptiste Bessières.
Yup.
In time, this unit will become the famous Chasseurs à Cheval of the Imperial Guard, the Emperor's ever-present bodyguard on campaign.
And it's remarkable to see all of these characters and all of these things forming early in Napoleon's career that will go on to be so important down the line.
This video is sponsored by Enlisted, the unique World War II first-person shooter, in which you lead your squad into battle in a variety of major campaigns, from Barbarossa to the street.
I'm going to let their ad play through since this is a new video, please go and check out this video. It's linked in the description. Go give Epic History TV a like, a subscription, and go check out their sponsor. They deserve to get their money for making these fantastic videos. So, I'm going to let this play through, and please go check it out.
Play Enlisted now on PC, Xbox, or PlayStation using the link in our video description and get a free bonus pack including multiple weapons, soldiers, and premium account. Thanks to Enlisted for sponsoring this video.
Sounds like a great deal to me. I have to provide for the defense of Mantua, the key to Italy. That's exactly right, and that's why I pointed out Mantua earlier. It's important.
Taken by surprise by the crossing at Borghetto, Boglio begins a withdrawal to a new defensive line in the Adige Valley. However, at Mantua, he leaves behind a reinforced garrison, well supplied and ready to withstand a siege of at least 2 months.
So we've gone from 2,000 to almost 14,000 soldiers holding this fortress. That is pretty tough to overcome, particularly if they're well supplied, which we've just heard they are, and they have a lot of guns. That'll take a long siege to conquer. And so far, Napoleon has been running this, as they called it, lightning campaign. He's been going quickly. This presents a serious challenge.
Napoleon cannot bypass Mantua. Its garrison is too powerful. But the fortress city will be a tough nut to crack. Its old walls surrounded on 3 sides by a lake and on the other by malarial marshland. The most unhealthy place in Italy, Napoleon tells the Directory.
Very defensible.
His biggest problem is his lack of heavy siege artillery. Most of these guns are in Milan, bombarding the Austrians, still holed up in the citadel.
And trust me, if anybody knows about artillery, it is the former artillery commander, Napoleon, right? This is where he begins. Remember the Siege of Toulon. This is what he knows. So if he says we need more guns, or we need to move the guns, he's absolutely right. He knows what he's talking about.
More guns were supposed to arrive by sea, but have been intercepted by British warships, commanded by a certain Commodore Horatio Nelson.
How about that?
Since April, Napoleon has launched 3 successful offensives, marched more than 200 miles, and won 10 battles.
Jeez.
But finally, outside the walls of Mantua, he is brought to a halt. And the demands on his limited force are growing. He must maintain the siege of Mantua, even though its guns outnumber his own and no direct assault can be made.
Remember, Napoleon came to the army of Italy. It was incredibly undersupplied. Discipline was not being enforced. It was a real ragged group of men that Napoleon whipped into shape and has won several impressive victories. But he can't magic up supplies from nowhere. He's still dealing with a serious lack of men and a serious lack of supplies.
He must protect his lines of communication back to France. And guard against further revolt in Lombardy.
And of course, these issues, lack of men, lack of supplies, as they're pointing out, are getting even worse over time, because now Napoleon is conquering all this territory, which he has to hold, cities he has to garrison, sieges he has to keep up. And so his men are being stretched thinner and thinner and thinner.
And he must be ready to face the Austrians, who are receiving reinforcements from Germany and will soon counterattack.
Yep.
To add to his problems, the French Directory demands that he lead an expedition to central and southern Italy. He's to threaten military occupation unless these states cough up huge sums to help fund the French war effort. Napoleon vehemently opposes the idea.
See, the Directory is still under the illusion that they're in control. Or at the very least, under the illusion that they can do a better job than Napoleon. He's done some impressive stuff, but he still needs to prove himself in the eyes of the government. he's still in the position where he has someone above him to answer to. Now, that's going to change down the line, but right now, that's the position Napoleon's in.
Marching troops the length of Italy in high summer, he warns, will end in sickness and death. Fortunately, strong words alone persuade Naples to sign an armistice. And in the end, Napoleon doesn't even have to go as far as Rome. The French march through the Duchy of Modena, the Papal States, and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, raising more than 40 million francs in tribute from states that are powerless to resist.
Wow.
Napoleon dines in Florence with the Grand Duke before returning to Milan. There he is reunited with his...
And by the way, Napoleon's career is already remarkable. He starts on Corsica, member of a fairly low-level noble family. He is aristocracy, but he's Corsican aristocracy, and in terms of the, rankings, he's not that high up. He works his way up through military school, has a couple of impressive moments, finally begins his campaign in Italy, and now already he's achieving these extremely impressive feats that really no one else but him could have done, dining with important figures, doing diplomacy on his own, governing territory he's conquered. I mean, already, this is an incredible rise through the ranks.
His wife, Josephine, who's arrived from Paris, discreetly accompanied by her new lover.
Not that discreetly. It was pretty obvious.
Napoleon does not linger in Milan.
Napoleon knew about her lover. I'll put it that way. It was not discreet. It was quite obvious, and they had a lot of relationship troubles.
Citadel has finally fallen, freeing up his siege guns. His troops have seized another 150 guns from the forts of central Italy. Napoleon can now make serious plans to take Mantua, and he has no time to lose. In the Tyrol, the reinforced Austrian army is beginning to stir.
Vermza.
Under a new commander.
Yup.
Beaulieu is gone. Now, 72-year-old Field Marshal Count von Vermza is in command.
Yes. Let's be honest, Beaulieu has not been very impressive. Sorry. Von Vermza, while he is also an old man, he is more of a formidable foe. I don't want to talk him up too much, right? Not necessarily a brilliant genius, but he's more formidable than Beaulieu was.
A courageous cavalryman, vigorous beyond his years, and determined to avenge Austrian defeats in Italy.
Yep. New enemy has appeared. And Napoleon knows the storm is beginning to gather. He sees what's coming.
Since crossing the Mincio, Napoleon has reorganized and redeployed his forces. General Massena's division is near Rivoli, watching the road to the Tyrol. Two of his brigades, under General Sorre, are at Salo, watching the western side of Lake Garda. General Despinois' division is in support at Peschiera. General Augereau's division is around Legnago, watching the eastern approaches, while Kilmain's cavalry mounts patrols. General Serrurier's division carries out the siege of Mantua itself. But Napoleon's hopes for a rapid conclusion to the siege are in vain. The Austrian garrison conducts a skillful and active defense, raiding French entrenchments and seizing supplies.
Yup. It's like, look, we've seen Napoleon push the Austrians back a lot, particularly under the leadership of Beaulieu, but they're not necessarily pushovers. At times, they can be slow, and they certainly have not adapted to the new tactics Napoleon brings to the table, but the Austrian army is still a formidable force, and we do see some impressive performances, like the defense of Mantua.
Murat, recently promoted to Brigadier General, plans to lead a group of men in Austrian uniform across the lake at night to take the guards by surprise.
Very daring.
But the operation's abandoned when the water level suddenly drops. the French step up their bombardment of the city, firing more than 1,000 cannonballs and mortar shells in one 6-hour period.
Jeez.
Mantua is being battered to pieces, but its walls are not yet breached.
Yup. The Austrians hold.
Napoleon is out of time. Field Marshal Vermza is finally marching to Mantua's aid.
And now, with Napoleon holding all this territory, him having the more established position, he is now the one being put in a bad position by the Austrian advance. Like I said, that siege of Mantua, that's going to take a long time. Time that Napoleon doesn't have. And now he has to deal with this fortress that refuses to fall, and the Austrians advancing from the north.
He has divided his army into 4 columns. 2 central columns are advancing down the Adige Valley directly towards Mantua. Another column to the east is making a wide flanking march, while a 4th column, under General Kostanovic, advances down the western shore of Lake Garda, planning to seize Brescia and cut Napoleon's line of retreat.
And this is as good a plan as any, but I'm shaking my head because I frankly think the Austrians should have kept their forces together. We'll see what happens, right? We'll see how this Austrian advance goes. But I think given how skillfully Napoleon has maneuvered up until this point, how he's been able to cut the Piedmontese off from the Austrians, I really think the Austrians should have kept their men together and gone for one unified assault, or just kept them all together and headed for Mantua to relieve the city, instead of splitting them up into 3 parts.
Massena comes under heavy attack and, severely outnumbered, abandons Rivoli and begins a fighting retreat.
Yeah, though, like I said, this plan is as good as any, right? They're still coming at Napoleon from several different spots, and Napoleon's marshals, or, goodness, those who will become Napoleon's marshals, not marshals yet, who hold these towns with a relatively small number of men, they cannot stand up to the men that Vermza is bringing down.
As soon as the news reaches Napoleon, he races to Castelnuovo, ordering Augereau, Despinois, and Kilmaine to join him as fast as possible. But suddenly, it is Kostanovic's column that's emerging as the greatest threat.
Yep.
General Saue's troops at Salo are heavily outnumbered. They put up a stiff resistance, but are forced to withdraw. The next day, Austrian troops surprise the French at Brescia. They take the town, as well as an army hospital containing 2,000 French sick and wounded. Even Napoleon's wife, Josephine, en route to Brescia, is nearly captured in the chaos.
Damn.
Vermza has wrong-footed Napoleon. Already outnumbered, he's lost 5,000 casualties. His left flank is in tatters, and there's a real possibility he may be encircled.
Yeah, Napoleon is in a bad position at the moment. And if this was anybody but Napoleon, I would say you're in a lot of trouble. You might actually lose this position. You may be encircled, you may be defeated, you may have to retreat from the region. But this is Napoleon, so I think we should hold off from saying he's defeated and see how he responds.
It's the greatest crisis he has faced as an army commander.
This is true. This is Napoleon. We know how brilliant it is, but it is worth remembering we are still at the very beginning of his career, and he's proven that he's very talented, but from how the directory still orders him around, you can tell he hasn't really proven himself yet. His campaign up until this point, most of it has gone to plan. Napoleon's laid out this brilliant plan based on speed and the discipline of his men, and it's worked. But he hasn't faced a threat this big before. He's being put in a bad position. I think at this point, the question still stands, can Napoleon deal with that? We really don't know. Some people, when put into this position, even if they've been brilliant up until this point, would fall apart. They can't deal with the improvisation. They can't deal with fighting in a position that they didn't choose. The question still stands, can Napoleon do that?
And will force him to make an agonizing decision.
Yeah. Every moment is precious. The enemy has broken through our line in 3 places. Yeah, Napoleon knows how dire the situation is.
On the 31st of July, after 2 months of blood, sweat, and sacrifice, General Serrurier is ordered to abandon the siege of Mantua.
Yeah.
He is to send 2 of his brigades to reinforce Massena and Augereau, and withdraw with the rest of his troops to guard the army's line of retreat.
And this is the tough decision Napoleon makes. Now it hurts, right? He spent all this time, resources, men trying to take this fortress, trying to take Mantua, and now he has to abandon it. But this is also Napoleon showing he can make those tough decisions. The question remains, has he made the right decision? We will see, but he can make difficult decisions. He doesn't just fall apart. He's proving that about himself. But we have to see what happens from here.
179 guns, plus ammunition and supplies which cannot be moved, are to be buried or tipped into the marshes.
Yeah.
Napoleon needs every man he can get. Because...
Though, of course, not only is abandoning Mantua a big waste of resources, which Napoleon knows, it's also a risk, right? Napoleon is pulling his men back to cover his line of retreat, and because he desperately needs more men to take on Vermza. It's as simple as that. He can't do it with the number of men he has right now. But, as you might notice, now Mantua is left basically undefended right behind him. So if the Austrians want to go for it, then the garrison of Mantua, which is fairly sizable, could leave, and now the Austrians have, not only do they have Kwasdanovich and Vermza coming down from the north, but they have a force right behind Napoleon. They have him surrounded. So Napoleon has abandoned Mantua. He's made that tough decision, which in some ways helps. It reinforces his men. He needs those men, but it also makes his position even more dangerous in some ways.
Because in the midst of the crisis, he has spotted an opportunity. Kwasdanovich's advance has caught him off guard, but Lake Garda separates him from the rest of the Austrian army.
And this is what I was saying about the Austrians splitting up instead of staying as one.
Napoleon will concentrate his forces against Kwasdanovich, beat him in battle, then pivot again to take on Vermza.
And this is classic Napoleon. We already saw in the first episode how he basically managed to do this with the Piedmontese and the Austrians. He managed to take them on one at a time. We're seeing it even more here. The Austrians have split themselves into 2 main forces. Napoleon's going to defeat one and then go for the other. At least that's the plan. This is a tactic that Napoleon is going to use a lot throughout his career. Once again, it's fascinating how we see some of these tactics and these ways of doing things that Napoleon is showing right now. Many of them he's debuting for the first time that will become sort of quintessentially Napoleon in the future.
The French divisions are soon on the move. Kwasdanovich's troops reach Lonato, but here they encounter Massena's vanguard. The Austrians come under heavy attack, and with French reinforcements arriving, they have to pull back. The next day, the French retake Brescia, along with most of their supplies, sick and wounded. Then, Napoleon catches a lucky break. Vermza has been on Massena's heels, harrying his rear guard as far as Peschiera. But now he receives reports there are French forces massing between him and Mantua. Mantua is his priority, so he swings south, away from Kwasdanovich, towards a city Napoleon has already abandoned.
Napoleon got lucky with that one, because of course the Austrian goal in the first place was to relieve Mantua. This is the Austrian foothold in the Po Valley. This is what they need to hold. And so if Vermza receives any notice that there is some risk to the city, he's going to go for it. And fortunately, he's received, I suppose, what is some false intelligence. So Napoleon got lucky on this one. I always say, when we look at these great men throughout history, Napoleon, Caesar, it takes a lot of things to get to that level, that status. It takes skill, talent, intelligence. You know what it also takes? A bit of luck. Napoleon is a very impressive character, but he certainly has his fair share of luck throughout his career.
By the time Vermza realizes his error, it's too late. He has gifted Napoleon 24 crucial hours.
Yep.
A blunder, for which he will pay dearly.
Oh yeah. A big mistake. Nothing is lost while courage remains. Courage and a good plan, which Napoleon now has. He has an opportunity.
The 3rd of August sees confused fighting west of Lake Garda. One French brigade slips through the wooded ravines unnoticed, straight into Salo, causing havoc behind the Austrian lines. But the Austrians repel 3 attacks on Gavardo, and all seems to be going well until their own advance meets Massena's division at Lonato. Massena's counterattack is led by the 32nd Demi Brigade, which is becoming known as one of the Army of Italy's most feared units. Bayonets only, Napoleon calls out, and you, 32nd, maintain your glorious reputation.
Nice.
The lead Austrian brigade is routed. Colonel Junot, though wounded 6 times, accepts their commander's surrender.
Yep.
Gwozdanovich's force has been mauled.
Junot, truly an impressive character in Napoleon's early career. Also quite a close friend to Napoleon himself, as we've seen in some of these videos on the early career of Napoleon.
Fearing for the rest of his command, and with no word from Vermza, he decides he must march back around Lake Garda to rejoin the army. The same day, 15 miles to the south, General Augereau's division fights an aggressive rearguard action near Castiglione, keeping Vermza at bay while Napoleon deals with Gwozdanovic.
And they mentioned how Vermza's mistake gives Napoleon 24 extra hours, a crucial 24 extra hours. With how quickly everything's moving, Augereau's rearguard holding off Vermza for a bit extra time, you can see how important even a few hours can be in such a fast-moving conflict.
Augereau begins with a bold attack on General Liptay's vanguard, driving it back to high ground near Solferino. But here, Liptay receives steady reinforcements as the rest of the Austrian army begins to arrive. Augereau keeps up the pressure, preventing an Austrian advance. And though there's a late scare when enemy cavalry sweep around his left flank, they are unsupported and soon pull back. For Augereau and his men, it is a long day of heroic action against a superior force.
Yes.
One which Napoleon will never forget.
Oh yeah, very impressive for, of course, Augereau's men, but Augereau himself. This is a pretty incredible achievement and is really crucial to this campaign.
12 years later, as emperor, he will make Augereau Duke of Castiglione, and always remind his critics, he saved us that day.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, by nightfall, Augereau's division is at breaking point.
You know, Napoleon can often be rather backhanded in his approach to his subordinates, a little manipulative, but as we've seen before, he does recognize when someone's done him a service, and he absolutely recognizes the service Augereau did him on that day. And as they just showed, he remembers it.
Our soldiers are exhausted from fatigue and hunger. If you don't send me reinforcements, I won't be able to hold out. Next morning, French troops renew the attack on Gwozdanovic and quickly discover he's beating a hasty retreat.
Yep.
A major disaster is narrowly avoided when 3 lost Austrian battalions stumble into Napoleon's headquarters at Lonato. They call on the general to surrender. Napoleon responds by loudly ordering his grenadiers and artillery into position, then demands that the Austrians surrender to him or be put to the sword. It's a bold bluff. Few of his troops are anywhere near. But the Austrians meekly lay down their arms.
And here we can see Napoleon is known for many things, and he certainly is brave. But I think if you ask most people, what are the top 5 qualities that you think of when you think of Napoleon? Bravery probably wouldn't be in the top 5. They'd say, intelligence, scheming, planning ability. But we see right here, Napoleon remains absolutely cool, calm, and collected in the face of an extremely dangerous threat. I mean, that could have been it for him. We can see his bravery and his ability to stay cool under almost any circumstance. And I think particularly in his first campaign in Italy, even more so than a lot of his other conquests, Napoleon's bravery, his ability to inspire his men and lead from the front, really comes into play a couple of times, a couple of very crucial moments.
As Napoleon swings his army round to take on Vermza, the Austrian must decide whether to stand his ground or fall back to a stronger line behind the Mincio River.
Yeah.
He chooses to stay put. By engaging Napoleon, he hopes to buy time for Kostanovic to regroup and resume his advance, and for Mantua to be resupplied. His reasoning is sound, but his intelligence is out of date.
Yeah.
And he's underestimated the speed at which Napoleon's forces will move.
So once again, Vermza is a more formidable foe than Beaulieu. I think we can all agree on that. Vermza, I think, has behaved fairly intelligently. Like I said, not the most brilliant commander you've ever seen, but some fairly sensible actions taken. Even standing strong here, it makes sense. But he's being let down by his lack of intelligence, Napoleon's superior intelligence, and the speed of Napoleon's army, which he just doesn't expect. And those two are connected, of course. Napoleon's speed, his quick cavalry, and the rate at which he's able to gather intelligence, and the relative slowness of the Austrians. They really cannot follow the French, and so their intelligence also is often out of date. And so Vermza, even though I think he's making sensible decisions based on the information he has and based on his experience, he just cannot account for Napoleon. The speed of his army, the unprecedented speed of his army, really not something Vermza would have been too familiar with. The tactics Napoleon is using, Vermza's lack of intelligence, all of this stuff is letting him down. And this is less something that is a failing of Vermza, though of course you can lay plenty of critique at his feet, but I think it's more a credit to Napoleon and how he commands his army, how he's disciplined them, how he's whipped them into shape. We're really seeing all of that here.
At dawn on the 5th of August, the Austrian army is 4 miles east of Castiglione, formed up in 2 lines. Its northern flank anchored on the village of Solferino, its southern flank on a well-fortified redoubt at Monte Medolano. Napoleon faces him with Massena's division in the north, Augereau's division in the center, and Kilmain's cavalry in the south. He's also formed an elite unit of grenadiers and cavalry to be held back for the decisive moment.
Also a strategy that will become quintessential to the Napoleonic playbook.
Napoleon doesn't seem to have much of an advantage. But he has 10,000 more troops converging rapidly on the battlefield. 5,000 under General Despinois, marching from Brescia. 5,000 more under General Fiorella, coming from the south. To buy time for these reinforcements to arrive, and to lure Vermza out of position, Napoleon orders Massena and Augereau to attack. There is a short exchange of fire. Then the French begin a feigned retreat. The Austrians take the bait, some units advancing off the high ground, while
There you go. Some of the brilliance of Napoleon, and brilliance we see from a lot of impressive military men throughout history. Vermza has a strong position, and Napoleon knows, to win this battle, or at least to buy some time, I have to fight on my own terms. So I need to draw Vermza away from that position. And so he performs this feigned retreat. And by the way, I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but just the fact that the Army of Italy can perform a feigned retreat like this is a credit to the discipline and training Napoleon has instilled in them. A feigned retreat is actually a pretty difficult maneuver to perform, because you have to, first off, perform a coordinated retreat, and you have to make sure that that feigned retreat doesn't turn into a real one. It's very easy when you and all of your comrades are running away to just keep running, because you don't want to turn back around and face the enemy, which, is dangerous and could kill you. So it takes a lot of discipline to perform a feigned retreat. And so, once again, credit to Napoleon and credit to the discipline he's managed to instill in the Army of Italy, which, when he found it, was a very ragged army. A lot of fairly experienced men, but discipline was sort of on the low.
Vermza extends his right wing, looking to outflank Massena's division. Around 9 a.m., the sound of gunfire from the south alerts both sides to Fiorella's arrival behind the Austrian left flank.
Vermza's in trouble.
Napoleon immediately orders Augereau and Massena to attack again, in earnest. Despinois' troops arrive to join the assault. But Napoleon has sprung his trap too early. Vermza is not yet fully committed and reacts swiftly. He organizes a new line to fend off Fiorella.
Impressive reaction from Vermza, and also a bit of a mistake from Napoleon. He sort of jumped the gun. Once again, this whole maneuver can be difficult to coordinate. So I'm not sure to what extent Napoleon acted too quickly and to what extent some difficulty in coordination played into this. But a bit of a mistake from the French, and a fairly impressive response from Vermza, or at least an adequate response, I'll put it that way.
And hurriedly recalls his right wing. But he cannot save the redoubt at Monte Medolano. Napoleon's aide-de-camp, Major Marmont, leads forward a battery to blast the position. His guns open a devastating cannonade, clearing the way for an attack.
And once again, we're seeing some fairly new Napoleonic tactics. At this time, a lot of European armies would have kept their artillery fairly stationary. That's not what Napoleon did. Remember, he started off as an artillery commander. He knew a bit about this. And of course, Napoleon was brilliant. He would literally reshape warfare through the new tactics he put into play. This was one of them. Napoleon was uniquely mobile with his artillery. He would move it around a lot more than was normal, and so he could take advantage of opportunities that appeared on the field. So, once again, this is something that Napoleon is using that most of the armies of Europe are not ready for, but later on, everyone's going to adapt to. This will become the new way of doing things, like most of the stuff Napoleon did.
Around 10 a.m., the reserve grenadiers charge forward with bayonets fixed, sweeping the Austrians off the hill. Meanwhile, to the north, the 4th and 5th demi-brigades surge onto the Solferino heights and seize the redoubt before Pozzacatana. Carried forward by their momentum, They storm the Solferino Tower and village beyond, the shaken enemy falling back in disarray.
Yep.
The Austrians are hard-pressed along the line, and now French cavalry and Fiorella's troops threaten to cut off their retreat.
So, you know, this plan didn't go exactly as Napoleon wanted, but still, this is becoming a pretty impressive victory for the French.
While Napoleon is active, energized, urging troops forward, Vermza seems to go into shock.
Yeah.
A French émigré serving with him recalled, he watched without seeing anything, saying anything, hearing anything. This brave old man, his head covered with white hair, did not think anymore.
That's unfortunate because, you know, I've been giving some credit to Vermza throughout this campaign. I think clearly he was outclassed by Napoleon, but I think he behaved sensibly most of the time. This clearly has shocked him, right? And by the way, a French émigré, for those that are not aware, émigrés were those who fled France during the Revolution. Most of the time, they were French aristocrats who, for obvious reasons, opposed the Revolution, and they fled to other countries throughout Europe. Britain, the German states, Austria, and a lot of these émigrés, these French aristocrats who had fled, would take up arms against the Republic during the Revolutionary Wars. That's an example of that here.
Finally, Vermza orders a general retreat, back across the Mincio River, covered by their cavalry and some late Austrian reinforcements. The French pursuit quickly peters out. After a week of forced marches in stifling heat, with little to eat or drink, Napoleon's men are close to collapse.
Yeah, they cannot go much further, and I think, frankly, Vermza gets very lucky that the French forces are close to collapse, because he manages more of an escape than should have been possible in his position. I mean, this is a impressive victory from the French, but it's not as devastating as it could have been for the Austrians.
But their general is content with what they have achieved.
The Austrian army has disappeared like a dream. Napoleon's descriptions are always so interesting.
Vermza's army finds temporary refuge behind the Mincio River. But Napoleon immediately resumes the attack.
Yep.
Massena is sent north to relieve the French.
Behind the river, by the way. If you remember from the beginning of this video, this was the defensive position that Austria was going to pull back to. And now, not only have they pulled back to the river, they've crossed it. They've gone beyond it.
Garrison at Peschiera and threaten Vermza's line of retreat. The Austrian general has had enough. After ensuring the garrison of Mantua is fully resupplied and reinforced, he begins his withdrawal to the Tyrol to regroup and rethink.
Pulling
the
even
French
further
nip
back.
at his heels all the way. Napoleon has just endured his toughest challenge yet as an army commander. And though initially wrong-footed by his adversary, he's displayed brilliant flexibility and his usual energy.
Yeah. You know, this was not a perfect response from Napoleon. He was caught in a bad position. There were a couple of mistakes along the way, but it absolutely shows Napoleon's usual brilliance and speed. So not perfect, but once again, a very impressive response from Napoleon. And his legend continues to grow.
To weather the crisis and then triumph. But Mantua remains the key to Italy.
Yep.
And while it stands unconquered, the Austrians will do everything in their power to save it.
Napoleon has now managed to push the Austrians back further. He defeated them at Castiglione, and Vermza has pulled even further back, but Mantua still stands. Like I said at the beginning of this video, it's going to be a big deal, and it's really been quite annoying to Napoleon this whole time. He besieged it for a while, unfortunately had to abandon that siege, and so Mantua still stands, and as long as it stands, Austria still has some sort of foothold in the region.
Vermza will be back, and when he returns, he'll find himself on a collision course with Napoleon as he launches his own attack on Austria itself.
Oh yeah.
Thanks again to Enlisted for sponsoring this video.
Yes, and like I said, please go and check out Epic History TV's video. It's linked in the description down below. Go and check out their sponsor, all that good stuff. Show them support for making this fantastic video. And that's exactly what it was. It was a great one. I've been really enjoying this series so far. I mean, I loved their original series on Napoleon, then their series on Napoleon's Marshals, and now they're doing more Napoleon, which is what we all wanted, right? We're getting Napoleon in Italy. Part 1 was amazing. This part was also fantastic. I am loving the series so far. And by the way, a quick note on something I said earlier. I talked about these new tactics that Napoleon is debuting on the battlefield. Don't get the wrong impression. It's not like Napoleon invented all of these, right? He just took them off the top of his head. There was a lot of military theory throughout the 18th century, but particularly in the latter half of the 18th century. A lot of people writing about how they thought the military could be improved, new tactics, new strategy to be employed. And so Napoleon didn't invent all of the stuff he's doing. Some of it came from him, but also some of it was stuff that he had read, or tactics, or just general ideas that he had read from these sort of progressive military reformers that he was now implementing on the battlefield. But of course, credit still goes to Napoleon in that, 1, some of the stuff he did was absolutely straight from his brain. 2, he had the guts to implement it. And 3, he had the brains, intelligence, and brilliance to implement these ideas effectively, right? It's not like no one else had read those books and pamphlets that had been written. A lot of people had. But, you know, who is remembered as the most brilliant general of this period? Napoleon is. So, just a little bit extra on the sort of Napoleonic tactics I was talking about earlier. Anyway, with that out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I certainly did. If you did, I would appreciate it if you would leave a like, subscribe, check out the Patreon for more exclusive reaction content, including full unedited videos that can't be uploaded to YouTube for copyright reasons. And please check out the new Discord server, which I've linked down below. It's just a server for talking about any videos on my channel, history stuff. We can talk about a lot of different historical topics, or just chatting in general, right? So yeah, I hope you guys are having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.